There's so many things that we can stop. Another thing we need to stop is funding the war in Ukraine. Don, I can't understand why we're fighting a war in Ukraine. And we're not bombing the Mexican cartels who are poisoning Americans every single day.
I just love moments like this when the right reveals the real reason they want to end war, so they can start a different war. If you've noticed, Trump and his dingleberries like Marjorie Greene and Matt Gaetz are very much opposed to the U.S. sending aid and weapons to Ukraine, and they frame it as stop funding the war. But don't get it twisted. There would very much still be a war going on if the U.S. didn't fund Ukraine. There just might not be a country called Ukraine. But let's back up, because too often Republicans get credit for being against war when they are everything but. Remember, Donald Trump actually admitted that invading Iraq was a bad idea.
I said it's a terrible and a stupid thing. It's going to destabilize the Middle East, and that's exactly what it's done.
And yet, when the far right says they think invading countries is a bad idea, it's not for the reasons that progressives are against war, like national sovereignty, not killing other human beings, not fighting a war for oil. Instead, their problem is that we didn't go far enough. Trump said this about Iraqi oil.
You brought up Iraq and something you said that could affect American troops in recent days. You said, we should have kept the oil, but okay, maybe we'll have another chance. What did you mean by that?
Well, we should have kept the oil when we got out. And you know, it's very interesting. Had we taken the oil, you wouldn't have ISIS. Because they fueled themselves with the oil. That's where they got the money.
So you believe we can go in and take the oil?
We should have taken the oil. You wouldn't have ISIS if we took the oil.
Calling that anti-war is like calling yourself a vegan, only you eat bacon. And remember, under Trump, drone strikes in the Middle East increased by 400%. So much for stopping war. Oh, and then Saudi Arabia murdered a US-based journalist, and Trump did nothing about it. Probably because they let him touch that orb. Ooh, almighty orb. But for some reason, this is the one war the Republicans don't want the U.S. intervening in. Conveniently, the one Russia started. Let's remember that part of the MAGA movement has been pretty cozy to Putin. In 2016, Republican senators visited Russia, and Trump's campaign was aided by Russian hacking and disinformation. Trump swears, though, that he alone could stop Russia's war on Ukraine, because he's so tough on Russia. Remember this?
He's a killer, though. Putin's a killer.
A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent?
Okay, to be fair, the U.S. is not innocent when it comes to killing, but Trump isn't about to go off about the My Lai massacre. He's deflecting. He's telling us there's compromat on him without telling us there's compromat on him. But back to Ukraine. Our word McForehead has introduced legislation to stop arms sales to Ukraine, supported by Marjorie Greene and others. And he has the audacity to say that there are no anti-war Democrats.
Yeah, where did the anti-war Democrats go? I remember when the squad showed up in Washington, D.C., and they were saying the military is racist. Now they're voting for NATO expansion, for goodness sakes.
First of all, no one voted for NATO expansion. And second of all, there was a anti-war Democrat on the House Foreign Relations Committee making decisions about foreign policy and trying to rein in the war machine. And her name is Representative Ilhan Omar. And you guys voted her off of that committee. If Republicans were so keen on ending wars abroad, why do they keep voting for the Pentagon budget at $800 billion a year? Why don't they call out the military as being socialist and then try and defund it? It's because they believe in the military so long as they are fighting wars of their choosing, the ones that target their preferred enemies, the brown enemies.
There's so many things that we can stop. Another thing we need to stop is funding the war in Ukraine. Don, I can't understand why we're fighting a war in Ukraine. And we're not bombing the Mexican cartels who are poisoning Americans every single day.
Can someone tell Margie about the drug war and the billions that we spent fighting cartels instead of legalizing and treating addiction? Get this a briefing. But it makes perfect sense that Marjorie Greene would say something this inane and belligerent, because Republicans are just against war when it might help anyone that isn't themselves. They're constantly thinking of what's in it for them. They don't want to dismantle the nuclear warheads. They want to point them at trans people and drag shows and CrossFit gyms. They don't have the word peace in their vocabulary. That's the stuff of woke libs who don't want nuclear annihilation. That being said, progressives and Democrats and Joe Biden needs to be finding a way to end this war and pushing for diplomacy. Again, not because Putin's our daddy, but because it's the right thing to do. If you like me and my work, follow me at Franny Fio on all the platforms and listen to my podcast, The Bituation Room.